Hope has won, and for these Malaysians, that means a new dawn. The opposition coalition led by Mahathir Mohamad's Pakatan Harapan, or the Alliance of Hope, won a simple majority in Wednesday's polls, enough to topple the ruling party, which has been in power for 6 decades. At 92, Mahathir is not a new face in Malaysian politics. In fact, he's the man who spearheaded the development of modern Malaysia, serving as Prime Minister from 1981 to 2003. Now he's back and doesn't want to waste any time before shaking things up.
There is a lot of work to be done. You know the mess the country is in, and we need to attend to this mess as soon as possible.
Mahathir has pledged to scrap a highly unpopular 6% goods and services tax, which many Malaysians have blamed for the rising cost of living. He's also promised to bring back fuel subsidies, which were stopped in 2014 due to a fall in global oil prices. And Mahathir says Malaysia may renegotiate some deals related to the Belt and Road project with China. Malaysia is the biggest Southeast Asian beneficiary of the initiative, having secured more than $34 billion in infrastructure-related projects. With domestic financial markets closed, Malaysian assets traded overseas felt the brunt of the unexpected victory. The offshore ringgit fell as much as 3%, while US investors dumped shares of a Malaysian exchange-traded fund, which sent the stock tumbling more than 6%. Credit ratings agency Moody's has advised caution over what it called uncharted territory for Malaysia. It's concerned that the proposed changes to the tax policy and the fuel subsidies would squeeze the country's revenue base. But other analysts say the temporary pain will lead to a more stable future.
I think in the short term, there is going to be uncertainty, and that is going to place some stress in the market. But in the longer run, this change is very positive for Malaysia, particularly in terms of good governance, transparency, and ensuring that the country can achieve its best potential for success.
And many Malaysians who feel he led the nation to its glory days are hoping Mahathir's the tried and tested leader to get them there again. Laila Humairah, TRT World.
Rajiv Biswas is the chief economist at IHS Markit Asia Pacific. He explained what the first order of economic business for Malaysia's new government is likely to be.
I think that one of the major areas of focus will be continuing the economic transformation of Malaysia towards a higher value-adding economy. This process has already been underway for the last decade, but Malaysia is going to become an advanced economy with the high income levels, according to the World Bank definition, in about 5 years' time. So it's going to face a lot of competitive pressures from other industrial hubs in Asia, which makes it imperative that productivity growth is accelerated and that the economy shifts towards high technology industries. And that's an area that's dear to Dr. Mahathir's heart. He was very much at the helm of Malaysia in its previous economic transformation from a commodities-based economy towards a more manufacturing-based economy. So this is something that he will very much be putting at the forefront of the economic agenda.
Sharaad Kuttan is a Malaysian journalist and a presenter at Malaysia's only English-language business radio station, BFM 89.9, and he joins us live from Kuala Lumpur now. Sharaad, selamat pagi. It is good morning to you over there. It's very early in the morning over there. Look, as
I would encounter this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, as a Malaysian, what are your feelings about having Dr. Mahathir back at the helm?
I think it's an extraordinary moment in history. And I think for those who remember perhaps the authoritarian style of governance of Dr. Mahathir, this is a very different Dr. Mahathir. He spent quite a bit of time on the stump, expressing regret over some decisions he made, including supporting Najib Razak into the position of Prime Minister. I think also the circumstances of his re-entry into politics makes all the difference. He's now surrounded by people committed to a democratic process, committed to human rights, who have a very different view of what governance might mean for Malaysians in the 21st century. So I don't think there's anything to fear of Dr. Mahathir returning to a kind of authoritarian style or a UMNO style of business in terms of governance. So yeah, I think it's a very welcome move. We see this as a breakthrough for democracy in Malaysia.
Sharaad, look, does this new coalition, in your opinion, does this draw a line under race-based politics in Malaysia? And if so, what challenges and opportunities, economic opportunities, does that throw up?
Well, I think it's very hard to say that identity politics in any context, if you think of Europe or North America, that these identities, community, sense of culture will ever go away. It's a question of what they adhere themselves to. I mean, they're systematic forms of discrimination based on ethnicity, then you have a problem. I think that the consensus is increasingly that there's a need for a new compact between the different communities, also between generations, between different regions in the country. So it's a much more fluid sense of identity, I think, and we see the reversals for the many race-based political parties in the country as part of the signal that Malaysians want something different. I don't think it means that race is completely out of the picture in terms of how people view things.
That's sort of my point, Sharaad. I mean, it is pretty much hardwired into the Malaysian constitution even, that these divisions along ethnic lines. And this new coalition, it is different from the Barisan National Coalition, whereby it's not divided, the parties within it are not divided along racial lines. So it is significantly different from the old regime, as it were. So does that change potentially the economic profile or the opportunities that ordinary people might be able to get going down the road?
Well, it's very hard to say. I do think that, as the adherence to race-based politics or policies in the main, I often observed in the breach, there is so much of Malaysia that's run on corporate lines with corporate values that are global, which allow for meritocracy, for instance, if that's one of the reference points. At the same time, the state seems to have a role in equalizing opportunities and making sense of rural-urban disparities and the like. And so, and some of that, fall in line with also ethnic and religious identities.
Okay.
I think the opportunities for a much more open economic regime as a consequence of changes in our politics are there.
Yeah.
It's I think a question of how it's going to pan out at this point in time.
Mahathir was the architect of Malaysia's modern industrialization policy. But part of that process was privatizations, handing out government contracts to particular businessmen. You might call that crony capitalism. Now that Mahathir is coming back, do you see him sticking to that formula? Or is the new Mahathir going to pursue a new economic path altogether?
I think it's a really good question to see how he runs the government that he's now going to be heading. He was sworn in only hours ago after many hours of delays. It's not clear that he's going to be the strong man that he once was, that, it's all about his vision. It might be a consensus-driven government that we have in Putrajaya, where he shares his ideas with his colleagues, people who've spent 20 years in the cold fighting for the very grounds on which this particular historic moment was built. So I don't see this as purely a story of Mahathir returning and him stamping again his vision on the country.
Right.
I think we have a very different situation now.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, Sharaad, but very quickly, one of the big issues has been wages in Malaysia. They've stagnated. They've barely budged in years, yet asset prices have been climbing enormously. Is this new coalition going to be able to give people a boost in their pay packets?
I think, with all major transformations like this, what we're seeing happening now is that expectations are going to run ahead of the capacity of politicians or governments to fulfill those expectations. And so there is going to be a gap, and I wonder how they're going to manage it. I think it's notable that a lot of promises were made. Some of the polemics around the economy in terms of cost of living and who's to blame for it, questions of debt and who's to blame for that, and whether the resolutions to these problems will lead immediately to a lifting of the sense of the burden of an everyday life.
Right.
It's not clear. I think it's still early days in terms of that.
It is indeed. Sharaad Kuttan, BFM 89.9. Thank you very much indeed.